Welcome everybody. My name's Colette Taylor. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here and to say thank you for selecting to come to our session today. We hope to engage you and actually have a real conversation with lots of dialogue toward the end of the session. But let me begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of this place, the Gadigal land on the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to all of the Aboriginals past and present in this part of this great country that is Australia. It's a great privilege to be part of the first ACECQA conference telling some of the story of the National Quality Framework. With me, I have three wonderful colleagues, and we're going to, together, focus on, first of all, an introductory story about the background research underpinning the National Quality Framework, and consider the beneficiaries of high-quality educational programs and practices. And in that sense, we're specifically focusing on children in this engagement. There are other beneficiaries, but I will explain as I go through why in a short session we really want to take the most significant beneficiary in terms of the reasoning behind the national framework. And I'll say a little about the process of measuring quality with the National Quality Standard Assessment tool, because there is a whole story behind the setting up of that tool. And we would encourage you to jot down some questions. I know if you've downloaded the app, you can also apply questions on the app. That is the reason I have to look over at the screen. I can't see from this particular microphone, but when I get to question time, I'll move out there. We will handle questions there. But effectively, I'm also welcoming and introducing Wendy Goldsack, who will follow me as a wonderful exemplar to provoke you around how a family daycare scheme, a very big one, is handling the work to assure high quality programs for children. And after Wendy does her presentation, we'll have a presentation from Maggie Cohen, who represents an exemplar of a long daycare setting and how that work is being done. And then finally, Jan Deans will present an exemplar around kindergarten preschool. And we want to then, the four of us, get back and really get engaged with a discussion, with you in a discussion. So to that end, we have Sophie and Anna, who are going to be holding microphones. There's Sophie and Anna and Sophie. There you are, yes. And just a housekeeping point at the beginning, because the session is being recorded, it would be really helpful if you raise your hand for a question or a point that you want to make at the end of our presentation time, and wait for Sophie or Anna to hand you a microphone. Okay. Thank you for that. So let's get going. And I'm going to put myself on a timer to make sure I don't overuse my time. Okay. I wanted to start just by taking one step right back from the National Quality Framework and our focus on quality, where we've actually defined for this country what is quality, but come back to the very beginnings of an international dialogue around quality from the OECD, and from starting strong too, back in 2004, 5 and 6, when we were working up the final work on the OECD report, which really did look at the focus on the quality of provision across 21 countries in the OECD. And we noted at that time, and it's worth holding this idea, quality is a value-based construct, and it has different weights applied to it if you have the perspective of an educator, the perspective of a health professional, somebody who's coming from a social welfare framework, from a labour market framework, or from economics. It's not to say that it's completely different in all of those frames, but the lens that we bring to the way we consider quality is going to have a slight nuancing of what we think is really significant. And there is a case under all of those different perspectives for the importance of the quality of provision in early childhood education and care. All of those kinds of areas make a very strong case for raising the quality of early childhood education and care provision. Today, our focus is going to have an education lens, because one of the other things that stemmed from the OECD work and was at the base of quality when the COAG group through the last decade was looking at this and working across all of governments, was thinking about a broad education concept. But each country's quality profile does link to the history and the context of early childhood. So while I just put that there as a ground point, and just to emphasise to you, there are common aspects of quality, whether you're here in Australia or in North Korea or in France or in Germany or in the US or Canada or Japan or Nigeria or Brazil, whatever country you happen to pay attention to. There are common aspects. And we do, at least in the Western research literature, share evidence, and we focus on long-term impacts. I'll also say from the beginning, much of the research is funded out of the United States. There's a huge scientific funding base that's had a long history in the US, and to a large extent as well in the UK and across Europe. Our funding base for intensive early childhood research has not been very great, but we do a lot on what I call the smell of an oily rag. We do very good research for very low dollars. But the first point, just in terms of the background, and Rachel Hunter mentioned this morning in the opening address, looking at the why. What is the story behind and the evidence behind the National Quality Framework? Learning from birth, learning as it's understood, it's from conception effectively, but the idea of learning from birth and what I call the birth of a learning science has been with us for about a decade now, and the evidence, both skills development and brain maturation, are hierarchical. They're bottom-up processes that they have higher level functions. In terms of our brain functions, our higher level functions are completely dependent on the lower level functions that have been established. So this is why we talk about the architecture of a house. The foundations, if they're very shaky, you're going to have a harder time as you get to more sophisticated demands and putting more load on a house by particular kinds of roofs or whatever. So the capacity for change at the engine room of neural development is greatest when children are at their youngest, in these birth to 5-year period, birth to 3 in particular. The neural circuitry is really developing incredibly rapidly in this first phase of life. And of course, early experiences, we know that connection. How well was it described? The connection between cognition and emotion from the last session. We know that early experiences have their biggest impact on children's long-term outcomes. And at that time, we are in this engagement of the connection between emotion and cognition. So in terms of the science behind this, the evidence base, it's actually developmental science in the first step, in the conception to age 5 phase. And that's the foundation in terms of our foundational reasoning for saying we are in the most important human development phase in terms of supporting the society's next generations. And brain and neurological structuring is a key part of why we are at this important stage. The second part, of course, is relationship, which was very much articulated. Emotional security, joint attention, that is, that a child can connect and attend with and to an adult. usually their first primary caregiver, but joint attention is critically important as a foundation to heading towards more and more formal learning. Emotional regulation, you know, as people who are working with very young children, the process of learning to self-regulate is subtle and it's not even noticed unless it's not there. But when it's not there, oh my gosh, you really know that the process of self-regulation hasn't developed or there is a challenge about it. And this is where, at this neurological level, these are the critical things in the essence of early learning programs and a sense of children's agency. So that's part of the relational area. And it might surprise, but the research base also focuses very much on the origins of one's physical health are right here. The long reach studies are really indicating the preventative health capacity of very positive early experiences in life. They change the data on diabetes, on cardiovascular disease, and on depression. Quite amazing. There's a new paper coming out from the becedarian long reach studies that remarkably is just indicating 35 years later the level of blood pressure is slightly lower. The diabetes rates are lower, and that's one of, we don't have a large number of long reach studies, 3 or 4, but all of them are coming up with these data, which is pretty amazing because that's not what the researchers were working on when they started with effective early childhood programs for children who were particularly in vulnerable and disadvantaged circumstances. So the message about learning from birth is the story of the National Quality Framework. And the National Quality Framework, in that sense, for Australia, is what I'd say expanding the frame of reference. We've known this as professionals for a long time. You've talked about this for a long time, but that message broadly out, and whether it's which lens, whether it's economics, whether it's health, whether it's social welfare, whether it's employment, or most significantly in our case, whether it's education, we're taking that in and being much more serious about the importance of quality. And that message about going far before what I say the preschool or the school. Some might say, well, we're not here to deal with school. Well, actually, we are joined up. It is a lifelong learning sequence and we have a huge role to play. So just to pick up the one illustration, as I was asked to give some particular background evidence, I've chosen the becedarian work because that's the highest level of randomised controlled trial studies. And this example just indicates it's quite a provocation. You might say, IQ, oh, what does IQ tell us? Well, if you think about IQ as a developmental score, effectively, and back in the early long-reach studies, these were done with Stanford Binet IQs. We use different developmental scales, but they are all effectively looking at the same cognitive functions. And you can see here on this, what we have here is outcomes of children asking what's the effect of having or not having a particular designed focused program in the very earliest stages of life. And in this case, between 6 months through to 48 months. And you can see at 6 months, the earliest assessments had the population of children, both the treatment children and the control children, in this sense, were equivalent in terms of IQ score. And by the point of 18 months of age, there's a statistically significant difference in the children's IQ scores. Those at the top of this scale are effectively in an effective early childhood development and learning program that's very carefully nuanced in an informal way, that's intentionally focused on building relationships and engagements and cognitive development, building vocabulary. And you'll hear a bit more about that as we go through. But effectively, the maintenance of that early hereditary IQ is maintained with this kind of development for very vulnerable children. And for an equivalent group of children, and these are more disadvantaged, children in more disadvantaged circumstances facing more risk factors. But if they are facing a no program or the standard program, whatever is available that's generalised, then they are dropping back, and the significant difference is the dropping away. And so you get the first evidence of a social gradient happening at that very early stage of 18 months. Putting this another way, these are dividing the children into three groups. Those who received an becedarian type of childcare in the blue, on the blue plot, those who received other childcare that was available in the same community on the red plot, and those who did not attend any group childcare, staying at home and were cared for by relatives or friends. Children who received other care. And you can see across that there are significant differences in terms of the children's intellectual development. So there is specific research evidence you can cite. Most of the economic arguments are built out of these studies. So in a word, the quality of program matters. Programs can have a negative effect. That's pretty scary, actually. We've got evidence that programs can take children backwards. Programs can have no effect, also not helpful, in that we effectively want to add value every year, every time in a child's life. Programs can have a positive effect, which is where the National Quality Framework and the intent and the content of what we've placed in the standards is really pitched towards, and programs can have an enduring effect. A lot of that is about intensity, regularity, frequency of a particular level of quality of program. So in that sense, now coming to our Australian Early Childhood National Quality Framework, I call this a decade of progress, because you can take the origins of this are a decade back. It's not just 3 years ago or 4 years ago or 5 years ago. Sure, in 2009, we had the launch of the Early Years Learning Framework, a terrific step. And internationally, we are so well considered in respect of what's been achieved in the last few years here under the National Quality Framework. Other federated countries like Canada, the United States, Germany, the UK, these countries are in awe of getting all governments of all persuasions together to focus collectively on this. So we can really be very proud of what we've achieved. It's interesting, the synergies. The OECD review pointed out 7 aspects of quality, and one of the key ones of those, as I keep coming back to, was an education concept, having this idea of lifelong learning, human capital development in the long reach, not only human capital for the labour market while we're caring for children, which is also a part, an important part of early childhood education and care, but the long reach of human capital is about the children and our future society. So we've captured those in the standards, and there's a lot of synergy between the bigger studies and what we have here. So what I want to do now, instead of reminding you, you're all very familiar with the national quality standards, I'm sure, but to cluster them into 2 types, the structural aspects of quality and the process aspects of quality, because this is why quality is a very complex construct, and that we have 7 different areas, and they're actually priming different kinds of things. But if you think in the research, the structural aspects of quality are about the what, the who, and the where. They're really setting threshold conditions into place so that our how, our relational work, our interactions can get into gear and really do the work, do the support of children. As I said, there are other beneficiaries than children, and we as a society are beneficiaries if we do the long reach of human capital development very well, but through high quality programs. But on the structural side of the equation for the framework, our story has been the early years learning framework and our time, my place, the out of school hours care framework. The physical environment, the health and safety dimensions that are built into the quality standards, that's part of the structural dimensions of the quality, on the quality equation. The staffing, that we have a higher level of qualification coming through and that we have better than we've had before in most situations, adult to child ratios. And I will come back to that in particular. And that there are stronger partnerships with families, always growing, always getting more dynamic, and oh wow, what a challenge after the last session. I'm thinking about that, how exciting it is. And of course, the leadership, how important that is in terms of setting the conditions into place. Effectively, both these areas contribute to children's academic and social development, and we can claim that contribution. And we should claim that contribution, and we should be able to name it very clearly to anybody that we speak to. I think the important thing to recognise, however, is that the structural dimensions on that side of the equation are actually mediated by the process. So the process is the mediator, and effectively the channel down through to children's social and academic achievements is very much focused in on the process. So what we're really focused on, if you get inside the research heart of the National Quality Standard, it's adult-child interaction. That is intentional, it's frequent, it's focused, and it's individual. It's one-on-one, it's that relationship, it's what we've just heard about in the prior session. But effectively, that's where the empirical research comes down to the core. And that embodies the relationships and the content. So it's the emotion and the cognition blended together in an interaction sense. And to that end, at the core, and that's a very simple story. I'm sorry, it's because I could spend many hours explaining. However, I've got to rush through this. The National Quality Standard has effectively picked up the idea in calibrating the assessment tool. We wanted to be sure that we dealt with the validity of the tool, and that's the background research, that it's the theoretical constructs there. There's been work to effectively have a rigorously designed and tested tool, and the reliability of the tool being applied systematically so that it's repeatable, that we have a consistency. That's been very much the focus. And in the sense of the national quality areas, we've got 3 forms of evidence, and I've actually foregrounded them. They are all critical, but the first form of evidence in the preparation for authorised officers is observe. The reason for that is about the interactions, because that's at the core, the absolute core, and discuss and cite. A more recent, this piece out of Science has just come out last month actually, but what we're looking here is the standard effect size of high versus low rated programs using a variety of quality rating systems in the United States that have synergies to what we have here. Okay, because in many developed countries, we've all been looking at the research evidence. You look across, as we did in the OECD, there are these aspects that are critical. But you will notice that on your far right, the significant, aspects that are starred here are those that have a really significant impact, that is, that have an effect size of at least 0.3. That's a large enough, that's a big effect size going upwards, is around the interactions. Now, the outcome measure in this case is children entering kindergarten and looking in it's United States data. We don't have such data here, although EFA Kids is moving there. Maths, pre-reading, language and social skills. They're typical things that are checked off as children enter into the more formal education system. And the interactions are the prime movers. They are the predictors. The environment, interestingly enough, is significantly related to children's maths outcomes as well. But the other aspects are not highly related. Now, that's not to say what's the fact of ratios and group size is not important, but it explains my earlier point. They are threshold conditions and they don't guarantee. We have to keep our heads really clear that as educators, we need really strong understanding of child development and our actual work, no matter who we are, no matter what level of work we're in, whether it's assisting, supporting, but if you're in the ratio, your work is interacting with the children. That's the focus. Ooh, okay, I'm almost done. This is the early data from the Australian E for Kids study, a study of 2,700 children that I'm directing that will wrap up late at the end of next year. Our children are now in prep and grade 1. But these children were picked up at age 3. In 2010, we looked at 300 rooms or thereabouts and went in observationally and read the emotional support, the classroom or the room organisation and the instructional support. And in that sense, what we've got here in the box plots, the coloured boxes are half the centres, half the settings that we studied. Half the rooms are in the green, the blue and the red boxes. The median score, oh, I'm sorry, it's gone off the screen. This is a 1 to 7 scale out on the side, with the lowest reading being down at the bottom. Well, we're in the mid to high range for emotional support. Not surprising. We do a terrific job, and I think in most cases that's come through. It's what people have focused on. From an organisational point, there is, and that is that children have things to do, that there are different modalities for them to get engaged in their learning, and that their behaviour is managed effectively. That's pretty strong as well across a very diverse set of settings. The whiskers, by the way, as I call them on either side, the bottom whisker covers about 25% of the settings. So we have a long way to go in some places, as we know, as well. And the instructional support is about language priority, back and forth exchanges, and concept development. Well, we've got quite a way to go with that, but this is new for us. We're in an education frame. We're in this idea of an early years learning framework, and this was captured at the very beginning of our story. So I think it'll be a place for us to know we're going to grow and know we're going to build further and focus on the interactions. In effect, just to wrap up, children's development is most consistently and strongly associated with the teacher-child interactions they directly experience in early childhood settings. And in that sense, sorry, my phone is going off telling me to be quiet. So in that sense, cognitive nurturing counts. At this point, I'd like to leave you with those thoughts. That's a very quick and simple way through to say, let's focus on what the heart matter is, which is the interactions, and work out how all the work around that doesn't get us distracted, but actually enables us further to keep focusing on that if we want to make sure we have that long reach, the long-term gain for the children in Generation Z and Alpha. I also note the Science of Learning Research Centre has been launched this month as well. So inaugural meeting for ACECQA's story on the NQF, and we have a National Science of Learning Centre which is really focusing in on this kind of work as well. And I'm very pleased to hand over to Wendy, who will give you the family daycare story. Thank you.
Hello everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Colette for inviting the City of Casey to be involved in her presentation today, so we're really excited about that. So first of all, I'm from the City of Casey, so I have a a bit of a diagram, because when you come to these conferences, you think, where is the city of Casey if you're in a different state? So there's a little bit of a map there where you can see where we are. So we're in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne, and one of Victoria's most populous municipality. The current population is estimated just in our municipality at 252,400 people, and our projections indicate that we'll reach 450,000, which is actually the size of Tasmania. So that's just in our municipality by 2036. So about 40 new households every week moves into our council, which is equivalent to 6,000 people every year. Currently we have approximately 260 family daycare educators in our service, so with about 2,500 children being cared for. So you can see something like these sorts of long-term gains, and that we have a lot of children that we can impact, so it's very precious. So to start off with, we were very fortunate to have one of our staff members, Anne Gaunt, attend the 5-day training from Professor Sparling for the Becedarian approach. Now, how many in the room have never heard of the Becedarian approach? Oh, there's a lot. I can just encourage you to write down Becedarian. It'll come on the screen so you can see how to spell it, and Google it when you can, because there's some fantastic YouTubes and videos and everything based on his 40-year research. So he spans a long time from doing that. So the DECD had funded him to present the Becedarian approach in Australia, and only a limited number of services took up this opportunity, and the City of Casey was one. Anne would have loved to have been here today because of her training, however she's overseas, so I got the gig. So his research has repeatedly shown positive results for children, particularly children who are disadvantaged in some way. So that's what he's based it on, and like Colette was referring to, the differences in the IQs. So following the training, Anne conducted several evening information sessions to our staff and our educators, because you can understand you're not going to have 260 in a room and have intense learning. So we had, repeated sessions so we could get through everyone and get that learning in there. So while there's many different ways of providing a quality service, our service embraced the fundamentals of the Becedarian approach to enhance and focus on the children's learning through the educational program and practice in their homes. So the Becedarian approach is basically these three key points: enriched caregiving, the learning games, and conversational reading. It really focuses on simple but deep, and as professional educators, and you've all probably been in the industry for a while, we sort of can't get over that we know it, but the general parenting and families don't know. So the Becedarian is very simple but deep philosophy. So at the heart of the 3A is the interactions. So the interactions between adult and child, and that's the main focus with Becedarian, is that interactions. So as the ELF definition of curriculum includes all interactions and activities, routines, experiences and events, everything planned and unplanned, the 3A fits beautifully into the framework that we find. So first of all, going through, and I know I've only got about 10 minutes, so that's where we've got the adult-child interaction with similar screen to what Colette had there before. So these are some pictures here of our educators as well, and if you look at the they can see the child, what the child's looking at. So that's the important thing with the Becedarian. Okay, so the learning games to start off with. The learning games, that's just a photo of the books. So there's a set of 5 books, and they're specific learning games in different age brackets. Now, these are used with the educators, with the children's on home visits. So in our service, we've purchased the group of books, and we'll just copy some off, here and there, and resource the educators with those. And staff will actually role model that in the educator's home with them, how to use those learning games. And they're very simple learning games, and it is really focusing, like I said, on interactions mainly. It's intentional teaching. So you actually take their interests, you look for a game that suits that interest and go from there. And it's like that, repeating it over so that they become familiar and learn that way. So depending on their age. Okay, and these books are available to purchase. I think it's the Australian Scholarship Group of Australia and New Zealand. So it's the depth of how they're done, and it's actually how they're done more than just playing the game. Okay, so the University of Melbourne has identified how learning games meet all these 5 learning outcomes. So they've also been introduced into our play groups that we operate every day with our educators across the municipality, and the staff role model those as well with the depth. Each game should be repeated frequently enough so the child has the opportunity to master the game so that they actually get that confidence. And many of the games encourage children to take the lead, which is developing their sense of agency, which is an important aspect of the framework. So they're the games. So what is enriched caregiving? This is recognition that there is no difference between education and care. They actually work in together. So caregiving is the everyday routine needs of children, like dressing, eating, sleeping, transition times, all the routines. And we all do it to a certain extent, but enriched caregiving is the educators making their routines opportunities for intentional teaching. So they actually have it that they're using everything. They're constantly thinking about how can we learn from this opportunity. So they focus on children being social. So their focus is, for example, greeting the other children by name when they arrive, each other. The children are greeting each other, saying goodbye. And that fits with the outcomes of a sense of identity. Just putting their bags down. The educators use that to discuss what they do with their bag, what's in their bag, the contents and where it goes, and that's their sense of belonging and predictability. They have their spaces. During nappy change, just talking about the routine beforehand, so they're putting language with the routines and knowing what is happening. So you can see how children being familiar with the routine, that helps the aspects of outcome 4, which is where they're making predictions and generalisations about the daily activities. And like I said, it's just that intentional language and intentional learning opportunities all the time. At mealtime, sitting with the children and using language as an opportunity to be social and enriching their learning. The routine of washing hands beforehand, that all fits in that, showing their independence and competence in personal hygiene. So the 3A encourages educators to actively and intentionally organise routines in ways that maximise the children's learnings. Okay, next one is conversational reading. So that's a third element. Okay, so this is to determine what the child is actually learning and understanding, and this is really, really exciting. The educators are using this for where they see where that child's at. So the purpose for individual reading, so conversational reading is one-to-one reading, not group story time, but it could be 2 children if they're 3 and over. So the purpose of individual reading is so that you can see what the child is actually looking at. So not having the child with their back to you reading the book like that, because you can't see what they're looking at. So you ensure they position the child on their knee or next to them to allow that. And that's very important with this conversational reading. We talk about the see, show, say. Okay, so that's the steps to see where the child is at. And bear with me because it is very basic. Like I said, it's simple but deep when you're hearing it. So the educator saying is looking at the child and it's looking at the sheep. So they can identify it for the child by say, see the sheep. So then they check the understanding to see if the child, you say, show me the sheep. But if the child doesn't show you the sheep, they're not at that level yet. So that's where you repeat that book, over and over. So and if they can show you the sheep, you can take it up one more step then. So the educator is asking the child something that indicates their knowledge by saying something about the sheep. So they would say, so what is this animal called? So then if the child says sheep, you actually know, they know the name of the child. But if they don't know, they're not at that level yet. So it's a real visual on understanding what the child is understanding. Older children, the educator may notice the child is seeing more details about it, like the wool or the horns or something. So the next see, show, say for those questions could be more detailed than just the sheep. So the educators are using that 3S strategy to get an idea of what the child is learning and understanding, and if they can see that child doesn't, they go back and back all the time. Okay, so it's a great way of assessing what they know, and one of our educators made a great comment. It was like a light bulb moment, because she just said, she goes, now I know what they know. So it was as simple as that. It's not just reading a book to children, it's that interactions. Okay, so when we share the concepts of 3A with families, they're sharing the program as well, and parents can do it at home, so once they have the understanding of it. So we've invited parents to come along as well to our evening sessions, and the feedback was excellent. And one of the comments was, it's so fantastic that the City of Casey cares so much about our children, because they actually see the development that we're focusing on. Okay. So now this is notice, nudge and narrate. So it sort of explains a little bit about itself. So the educators are noticing that, what the child is doing, and then they'll nudge them to try something a little bit more different, and then they narrate it, they put words to it. Like we talked before, like interactions is so important for that development, that you're actually putting words to everything. So it's like looking at a child at what they're doing, and it's saying like, I notice you're trying to do your zip up, so you're putting words to the zip. They may not have known it was called a zip, today, and then you're asking them, can you do it? Things like that. So you're actually, noticing it, nudging them to do it themselves, say things and all that, and then narrate the actions. So that's the notice, nudge and narrate. So in summary, so along with many other quality practices, the becedarian approach assists our educators to promote children's learning across the 5 learning outcomes. And in the beginning, I spoke of the 40 years that Professor Sparling's research on the 3A, which is a becedarian approach. In one of his presentations, his statistics showed, and these are phenomenal, so for long-term gain, that fits nicely in this presentation, that there's less depression in the control group that he was working with at the age of 21, healthier lifestyles, better nutrition and more exercise. It was 3.92 times greater in the control group. Reduction in marijuana use, 18% versus 39% of the control group. Less likely to be a teen parent, 26% versus 45% of the control group. And fewer risky behaviours at 18 years of age. So these statistics are evidence of a definite long-term gain for children, and the City of Casey Family Daycare Program is embedding it into our service so that our 2,500 children can benefit from the strategies of 3A. So that's about it for me. Thank you. Who's next? Maggie? Google.
Hi, I'm Maggie Cohen. I come from Treehouse Early Learning in St Kilda, which is an inner suburb in the city of Melbourne, or just outside the municipality of Melbourne in the city of Port Phillip. We are a relatively large childcare centre with 150 children and 45 educators of varying backgrounds, qualifications, passions and interests. When the E4 Kids study started up, we were very fortunate to have several of our 3-year-olds involved in that program. And the reports that Colette was speaking about earlier, particularly the graph with the 3 coloured boxes, really hit home for us, that we saw, yes, our environments are pretty good. We've put a lot of thought into our environments. Our interactions are pretty good. We've got people that really care about children. But it really hit home that intentional teaching box was on the low side across the whole study. We would hope that at Treehouse we were on the top whisker going up and not the bottom whisker going down. But wherever we fell in that, we saw there's a really strong message here that we need more consciousness in our intentional teaching. So as a centre, we thought, well, how are we going to do this? And with the whole quality agenda, we thought, well, a quality improvement plan isn't really about someone sitting in an office filling out a form to say there's quality improvement happening here. What we really felt we needed to do was to create a culture or a community of educators that are really passionate about what they do, and to build in daily habits of critical professional reflection, making times where we stop, we pause, we look, we think, and figure out, what are we doing well? What are we going to do more of? What haven't we done that it's time to do? Well, being quite a large group and with a diverse group of adults working with the children, we knew we needed to find lots of different ways. I think those messages came in the opening sessions very clearly, that people are learning in different ways. There's different styles of leadership that people respond to. So we looked at, well, we've got to have lots of different ways of approaching this reflection on quality and intentional teaching, different ways for different times for different people. So I'm going to run through a few of the pool of ideas that we've been working through in the last couple of years. This pool of ideas keeps growing, keeps refining. There's always a new, let's try this. But I'm going to run through a few of the things we've been doing to really instill that culture of critical reflection every day. Starting on the everyday, each of our rooms has an iPad, so we're able to take photos and start documenting the children's learning without leaving the room. We're careful that that doesn't interrupt the interactions with the children, so we work very collaboratively as a team of educators. Quite often, someone's standing in the background noticing there's an interesting conversation going on there. I can't hear what it is, but I can tell by the expressions, the focus, that there is something interesting going on. So we're in the habit of taking photos of each other at work, really capturing those interactions. Throughout the day, we all find a moment where we can just pull ourselves out of the busyness of the day. Perhaps one person might be reading to several children. Another person can just sit off to the side, close to a small group of children who might be playing quite independently, and spend a few moments having a look at some of those snapshots that have been taken. And we've got some very helpful software that prompts us to take those photos and do three things. Firstly, we described what happens, what was happening there. And then we're prompted to think, well, what was the learning or development that was happening there? And then the third point, what was the intentional teaching? Sometimes we write about ourselves so we can really think about, what was I doing? What was I saying? How was I listening? How was I responding? What message was I giving there? Sometimes we're a little bit modest. There's probably quite a few modest people in this room. There tends to be in this field. We spend a lot of time looking at other people, particularly little ones, and celebrating them. So we also write about our colleagues and what we notice in each other. When we're on programming time, what I've just described we call a program journal. And we do 2 or 3 or 4 of those a day, and the parents can view those regularly. When we have programming time, we take those program journals and we pause and we reflect more deeply. We might add some more detail, but we'll go down to those, the second and third boxes. What was the learning and the development? And we'll think, well, what more could it be? We think, well, what was the intentional teaching? And we think, what more could it be? And this is how our program evolves. From this, we make plans, we make goals for children's learning, we think of our ideas, activities and experiences that will support that, but we really think, what are the outcomes for children that we're hoping to get here? And when we're planning new experiences, we're not just thinking of the spaces and the materials, but we're really thinking about that intentional teaching. And that really comes down to the relationships with the children. What questions am I going to ask? How am I going to ask those questions? How am I going to respond? Now, some of us are quite wordy and we love typing away on the computer and spitting out a whole lot of words about those plans, but I work with a number of people who do not enjoy the words and are much more creative and artistic and visual than I am. Some of these people are more inclined to document the program and describe what's going on and share the stories of the children's learning through some really beautiful displays and notice boards and walls and pieces of art. Well, we really view that. That's also an act of critical reflection, because if they're going to spend the time creating a display, we really expect that there's going to be a level of thinking. What are we trying to communicate here? What is the important message? What are we trying to show? And then using those visual displays, what is the best way to display those ideas? As well as documenting our program with the program journals, deeper observations, modifications to the program, and displays in various forms, we've created times for conversations, because we really think, you can read a book, you can read an article, you can do some thinking on your own, but what's really exciting is when we can discuss our ideas, share our ideas. Someone might have a half-formed idea. Talking about it with someone else helps to really fill out those ideas a bit more. Someone else in the conversation might well have something to add, and it makes it really exciting, really collaborative. So we've looked at a whole range of ways of having conversations at a professional level across our program. One of the ways we do this is team meetings. So I've described Treehouse in St Kilda as quite a large long day care centre with 150 children a day. It doesn't feel large when you're in there, because the spaces are organised into little mini communities, groups of 2 or 3 rooms that are grouped together and share a playground and really work quite closely together. It's like you've got a really good next door neighbour that you can pop into and not borrow half a cup of sugar, but maybe half a pot of paint. And those conversations flow. We have an open indoor-outdoor program running all day long. So we've got educators from rooms together, sharing playgrounds, popping in and out of each other's rooms to look for a lost hat or return a train or borrow a book because it's glorious under the tree. Can we just grab that book that you've got on your shelf? There's a group of us that want to enjoy that together. So about 6 times a year, we make time for team meetings. So for the educators in those little mini teams of 2 or 3 rooms to meet together. We have lots of little quick conversations on the fly every day, but as you can imagine, with 150 children, there's a lot of little interruptions that are really important. So our conversations are often put on hold. So we get together in our team meetings and we have some standing agenda items, and quality is one of those. So we're looking at things like supervision, interactions, changes in family and children's needs. So we have those conversations together with the people that we work most closely with, so we can exchange ideas, really collaborate and get excited about what we can do together. Flowing on from those team meetings, we also have whole centre meetings. And I did have some slides somewhere with some... Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, so this is what I was talking about earlier with the documentation of the program journals and the observations. Oh, sorry, wrong direction. I'm not very IT. This is actually a staff meeting. So it's what we do in our whole centre staff meetings is we come together at the beginning where there'll be a brief message, something important, hopefully inspirational to share. But you can imagine when you've got 45 people together, the exchange of ideas is not necessarily going to be terribly deep. There's going to be some people like me who have been instructed quite clearly at times, you're not allowed to answer this question, Margie. You've got to give someone else a chance to speak. And there'll be other people who really won't ever speak. So we start off all together with a brief message, but then we move off into little workshop groups. And we usually rotate a couple of these through our evening, where you get smaller groups of people to really explore an idea. This was a little discussion group about collaboration. This was a lovely discussion group about responding to parents' concerns. So when these groups become smaller, the conversation is richer. We've had our team meetings where we're talking with the people that we work most closely with. And in our whole centre meetings, when we break off into these little workshops, we try very hard to mix up the groups so we're not talking to the people that we work most closely with, to just broaden off that range of ideas and inspirations and conversations. In addition to our whole centre meetings and our team meetings, because we're quite a large centre, we've got quite a lot of leaders. So we also have leadership discussion groups, which are very similar to the team meeting groups. But it means that we can vary the topics and the types of things that we're exploring to really tailor to where individual people are really ready to think and be challenged and be inspired. Lost our notice board. I'll go back to that. Sorry, I just wasn't quite sure. I thought these were going to go through for us. We do some other things in large groups too. We do a couple of big events as well. We've done a whole lot of self-reflection, small group conversations, motivating each other in smaller groups. But being a little bit modest, sometimes we need to look at each other for inspiration as well. And there's a couple of things that we've done that have been really successful and an awful lot of fun. One of our whole centre meetings was a trivia night. So we were sitting in lovely tables with flowers and candles and snacks, and yes, there were some nice bottles too. And we had some questions about the national quality standards. So our trivia questions were largely about the national quality standards, and it was a really fun way for us to reflect on the breadth and depth and complexity of our jobs and all the things we need to know. There are also a few questions thrown in there by our managers about things that had been identified that we weren't terribly strong on. So at the end of the night, we all left having had a lot of fun, some friendly competition, a bit of laughter, but we all left with a greater understanding of what our job really entails, what we need to know a little bit more about personally, and who in our community of educators knows what we don't know, because they got the point on the question that I didn't get. So who do I need to go and have a conversation with so I can get that point next time? It was really fun. Other ways that we connect for rich, deep conversations is we have 5 centres in the Treehouse group. So we have quite regular and interesting professional development sessions where we come together as a group. We've got a similar philosophy. We've got a similar management style. There's lots of similarities, but because we're spread out across Melbourne and we're full of individuals, we've got some differences as well. So that once again just broadens that pool of people that join our conversations and inspire each other and share our knowledge. And 2 more things that I really like to squeeze in. I think I've got about 30 seconds to tell you about. We like to celebrate our achievements as well and celebrate each other and keep that inspiration going. So every year we have our big gala event and we have an awards night. So coming up to the awards night, colleagues are nominated. You know, everybody is invited. Who have you noticed doing something really exceptional, really inspiring? And all of our awards are based on the practice principles of the framework. So they're really relevant to our national quality agenda and our quality improvement plan. We take all these conversations, our documenting, our awards, our trivia nights, all of this is really helping us to think about quality improvement. And so that we're not nervous about quality improvement and it becomes a habit, a way of life, something that was really expected of us. We also have some mock audits. So I think quite a few people here at the conference are looking forward to really getting some tips and some ideas of what the audits are like. And we thought, well, we don't want to be scared of them. So we practice them. And we find that constantly, frequently, having reflective questions sent to us really helps us to think about what are we doing well, what haven't we thought of, just by explaining what we're doing, we're really deepening our understandings. So there's an awful lot of exciting ways. Having a big team, we're really always looking at new ways and diverse ways. Everyone will do one or two things. Some people will do a bit of everything, but everyone in our community is going to be thinking just a bit more deeply.
Hello everyone, I'm Jan, and I'm going to conclude the presentation today. So thank you Colette, and thank you Wendy, and thank you Maggie. Now, I'm going to move you into a different dimension, and I'd like to just move on to my section here. I've entitled the presentation Young at Heart. Now, do any of you know Tom Waits? Was really, a few hands, was really great to think that Paul up the back, when I was getting this sorted, said Tom Waits. So let's just listen to Tom Waits. Thanks, Paul. So he has a lot to say, and the children have a lot to say, and we all have a lot to say, and we have it within ourselves to find the part of ourselves that is the quality that we bring to our learning environments. Sonia Sanchez, I don't know whether you've read the book, Visionary Director, has written this poem, and it's quite inspirational. And she says, "Where is your fire? You've got to find it, and you've got to pass it on. You've got to find it, and you've got to pass it on from you to me, from her to her, to him, from the son to the father, from the brother to the sister, from the daughter to the mother, from the mother to the child. I say, where is your fire?" When we think about quality, we have to think about where our fire is. We have to think about where our passion lies. And for me, when I thought about it, I was thinking, what we do need is we need huge imaginations. We need to have imaginations as big as the imaginations of those young children. Because there's something about life where the creative process tends to dwindle away. We want to revive that. We need that passion, and at the end of the day, we need activism. So for me, when I was thinking about setting up an early learning centre for 170 children and for 35 staff, I was thinking, well, what is it? I have to have a vision, and I've got to have the vision about quality for the place, what it looks like, for the people who are there in that place, and for the learning that was going to take place. So I came up with some ideas, and I was stimulated also by John Lennon's Imagine, and that beautiful song, continually resonates to talk about equity and inclusion and beauty and quality. So I set myself a task of setting some statements, and these are they. So the first one, what about your early learning centre? What about the quality of it? Does it integrate the best of the past with visions for the future? Does it expand the individual's capacity with those big words to perceive, explore, express, reflect, and excel? And if it does, what does it look like? How have you interpreted that statement in quality terms? And then imagine the psychological environment. We're talking a lot about emotion and heart thinking. And I want to stop for just one moment. Earth, art, heart are really a great triad to think about. A psychological environment that instills in children great qualities, qualities that we talk about all the time: empathy, integrity, respect, and tolerance. And if we want those qualities in our children, what do they look like? And how do we make those happen in our environments? And then imagine learning spaces a child coming into a room every day. What does that quality space look like? How do you want to present it? How do you want to present your cultural heritage? How do you want to present the aesthetic experience? How do you want the children to experience the connection between nature and their cultural heritage? What would that look like? And then imagine again, you know, it goes on. There are so many facets. As Colette was saying, there's the structural side and the process. But what about the curriculum? What does it look like? Words, sounds, gestures, ideas, models, teaching concepts, experiential processing, children's ideas and their interests, and their skills. And don't forget their skills. It's okay to teach. Teaching is a great profession. Intentionally guiding, scaffolding children's learning. And what does that look like? And then I was thinking about NQS and the Early Years Learning Framework, and I thought, you know, there's so much to take in. Are there frameworks we can think of? And this is just mine, and it's not one that is published, but it's very personal. And I thought, okay, we've got NQS and we've got the Early Years Learning Framework, and we could think about development down the centre. Cognitive, language, social, emotional, physical. Or we could change the centre and we could have maths, sustainability, the arts, science, technology, language, literacy. And there was a third one I had in there, which was really quite activity-based. It could have been dramatic play, blocks, outdoor play. But these are just schemas to sort of wrap up ideas around quality. And then I thought, diverse learning styles. So imagine, how do we have to wrap everything up so that all children have the opportunity to learn at their optimum level? You know, an environment that stimulates children, and the big ideas here are hypothesize, understand relationships, and solve problems. And then imagine again. This is the community. You've got a community of learners. You've got your children. You've got your teachers. You've got your families. And you've all there together, as Maggie was saying, in a large community where you're sharing your ideas and you're sharing your lives together. And you're establishing your own traditions and your sense of collective history. So you do things together, you meet together, you talk together, you handle things together, you read stories together, as Wendy said. But for me, the most important threads in my curriculum to gain quality, there are two main ones, and I'm only going to just very briefly cover this now. But the first one is about the arts. And I really think that the arts enable us to enter that realm of quality. They help to develop self-awareness, communication, discovery and pursuit, learning partnerships. They help with perception, help children to develop techniques, to analyse and to critique. And through a whole range of activities that are the visual arts, which involves drawing, painting, printing, constructing, modelling and sculpting, making music together, listening, playing, composing, notating and conducting, dancing, as we saw earlier, improvising, expressing, learning skills, performing, choreographing, critiquing each other. Dramatic involvement in enacting, enrolling, miming, story building, using language and props. And through the more recent use of media technologies, moving images, sounds, words to create, communicate, deconstruct meaning through storyboarding, soundscaping, picturing, and using graphics. It's a magical world we have in our hands here, and we have the capacity with our own visions and dreams to enhance quality on so many different levels. T.S. Eliot says we shall not cease from exploration, and at the end of all the exploring will be to arrive and know where we started and know the place for the first time. And that's where it is with quality. Keep searching and seeking, and always feel like you know the place for the first time. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Now it's time for a conversation. I can't see, I'll put this screen down a little, hopefully, yes. And I can see the apps, but let me just, you might want to speak among yourselves for a minute, but hands, any show of hands for some questions or some comments around the idea of the National Quality Standard, your story about enhancing and focusing on quality in your different ways, in different settings, in different situations. Questions about the evidence, challenges, critiques, everything welcome. We've got one here and another one there. Thank you. And you might say your name as well.
Hi, I'm Susie. I'm an owner-director of a 45 Place Centre in Engadine. From my experience, I find being present with the children so that intentional teaching can be maximised is best in a centre of culture, with a culture that is non-threatening, that is very transparent and not overwhelming with all the other red tape and all of that documentation that needs to happen. Who's the 150 place person?
Maggie.
How do you guys ensure that the staff aren't overwhelmed by issues with all of that documentation or anxieties that might come from personality clashes, power trip directors that could interfere with the staff, the educators being present with the children and being able to scaffold their learning and be their intentional teaching at their best.
Yeah, I think I know exactly what you're asking, and it's really complex and complicated because we've had so many conversations where we know relationships are critical. So those relationships that the educators have with the children are critical, but also the relationships that educators have with each other are also critical. And so the job is never done. You're always tweaking, you're always finding different ways. But just as an awful lot of work goes into the enrolment placings each year, an equal amount of work goes into the staff placings as well. So we're actually currently this week beginning that process with a little questionnaire for everyone. You know, we have quarterly reviews. Each staff person, their immediate supervisor and the centre manager, where do you see yourself in 12 months? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where are your passions? Where are you feeling you need support? So we try and match people up. At the moment, you know, the question is going out, where would you like to be next year? Who would you like to work with? Who would you not like to work with? So that we can make matches that are harmonious. And then I was describing those various types of conversations that we have So we have conversations with the people that we work with most closely. Fingers crossed we're all well placed and those are really rich, but sometimes they're not. So then it's the little workshops at whole centre meetings where we get to brainstorm and have conversations and support from someone that's not necessarily in our room or the next room. So it's finding the allies, it's finding the supporters, and it's understanding we all come with personalities and diversity, and some relationships are going to be easy and some aren't.
Thanks. Yes, there's one. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jo from Kingscliff TAFE. I'm interested as well in the Maggie, and I like your idea of the meetings where you start with a central idea and then you separate off. I was wondering how you get staff to report back, because I find that's a challenge. Like when we break off into smaller groups, getting that richness to feed back into the larger team is a challenge for me, and I just wondered if you had any ideas about how you feed that information back from the smaller group to the bigger group.
Absolutely. My 10 to 15 minutes, when I practiced at home, I listed everything, but ran out of time. One of the ways that we do that is we also have regular emails that go out. So on the centre philosophy, on policies, on national quality standards, and questions that flow back from the team meetings and the whole centre meetings where people are invited, please respond. And so people take a few moments to jot down a few ideas. And the ways that those ideas are then pulled together and re-expressed are just as diverse as the conversations that have happened. So there'll be newsletters, there will be displays in the hallway leading to the staff room of highlights from the last team meetings.
Okay. Yes, here's a question up here. Thanks. Sophie?
Thank you. It's not really a question, it's more an interest to you, Professor. The research that you had produced and was showing us around the differences between good quality care and education and negative quality care and education, and then when the children just stayed with family and care, was that including children that didn't go into care, that just stayed with parents?
Yes.
Okay, so it is quite a difference, isn't it?
Right, Mark.
Yes.
There are many studies, obviously thousands of studies that have been done over the years, and there are some patterns that come through, particularly for children with more risk factors, with more facing more disadvantage. And those children are often the children who don't access regular, affordable, high-quality education and care support in their very earliest years. And I know too that obviously parents are their child's first teachers, and that's a very important part. It's a critical part, and it's why as educators we need to be providing a great deal of outreach support, connectedness to families, to parents about their engagements with children, how they can most ably help their children's learning and development if they're having difficult patches in whatever that might be. And we need to hear and learn from them about how they are engaging and what's valuable and important to them, so that we can convey some similar values and appreciate and take in the culture of the family in our interactions. It's a two-way communication, but it's sometimes a hard recognition for families who perceive that it's the best thing possible is to be at home with your child for the whole time until they enter perhaps preschool or kindergarten or whatever. But there's clear evidence to suggest that's not the case for all children.
Yeah, I just wonder, I know there's been some longitudinal research done in Queensland.
Yes.
With children from pregnancy. They'd been followed right through till they were 20, and the study was still continuing.
Right.
About the difference between no care and care. So it was quite interesting, and I wondered if that had linked into it
No,
all.
that's not one of the studies I was actually specifically referring to, but yes.
It's interesting to look at all the different...
Indeed, yes. And I think it comes down to, it does come down to whoever we are as adults, as parents, as educators, carers, relatives, supporters, the way we are engaging with very, very young children from infancy makes a difference. And we do that more and less well any time, any day with any child. And, you know, the most informed and most thoughtful of us all, the collective of us here working every day with young children and with our best aspirations, our better selves come out for much of the time, and sometimes we don't do it so well either. And that's part of being human. But the aspiration and the inspiration to realise how significant it is, and the cumulative hits, if you like, from a child's point of view, of getting more positives, getting more supports, getting more encouraging strokes, getting more recognition in the sense of really hearing what a child is trying to convey and expressing, hearing what a child is expressing. And Jan's points about the arts and the symbolic representation that the arts can give to get inside of what a child's thinking and feeling and imagining is a great way to do that too. So it's a kind of ongoing quest, and that's why I think quality, no matter how exceptional one might think one's program is or one's room is, there's always more we can do, and that's the exciting quest that always working with young children. They're dynamic, they're different, families are varied, families have different values. We always learn more from the mix and the dynamism, and we recognise that it's a collective endeavour, and we do our best. And when we don't do so well, there's someone who'll back us up as well and pick up and patch up, and we'll patch ourselves up, and we carry on and have another go.
And actually, just a last thing, Wendy, I think it was, the becedarian. I can't even pronounce that properly. It was just really interesting. I was listening to you speak, and I was watching the images, and I was thinking Montessori, Vygotsky. Okay. So it was really interesting to just from my theories that I go through, and some of the theories I work with children and families, I could see those coming out. So it was good to see some of those theories behind it.
Oh, great, thanks.
Just a quick note on that. The Perry High Scope plan, do, review kind of strategy is one of the really high touch, high signature. The reason I selected becedarian in the front end today was that it focuses from birth, and it was particularly focused in the birth to 3 phase, and with the neuroscience that fits very well. Perry High Scope, terrific evidence, great research, particularly from 3s through to 5s, that kindergarten period. And Chicago Parent Centre programs, that's a long reach set of studies. They have, highly regarded Reynolds work from Chicago. There are several, the Alvera program, but it's a handful. And when we talk about those studies, they're the randomised controlled trials, and it's not a matter of one group back in 1968 with 112 children. That's the original. That they are the originators of the long reach evidence, but there's been, at least in the case of becedarian, there've been 16 different longitudinal studies over the last 30 years, and with very different groups of people, low birth weight infants, for example, where it's not focused entirely on those most disadvantaged, in high poverty, African American children and so on, where you think, oh, this is not really relevant, perhaps, but that they have been robustly tested. So when I'm asked about what's the evidence, I go to that because that's what in terms of the highest level of science reports. Ros had a question or a comment. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Ros Cornish, and I'm the National President of Early Childhood Australia. Thank you to the 4 of you. You have demonstrated, I think, to us how you've faced some of the challenges in a really positive way around the reform agenda, particularly the NQF. But I can't help but raise an issue. Mm-hmm. The evidence, Colette, that you've presented today, and the great positive steps that the 3 of you have shared with us today, I can't help but raise my concerns after Saturday's event. And it would be remiss of me not to raise concerns about the current incoming government's policy on early childhood and the real potential for some of the steps made, progressed by each of you in your own way, and indeed through research, that the steps we've taken, and many of us have worked for all our lives for some of these reforms, we just have to hope, advocate that this continues with research that you're undertaking and the work that you three ladies are doing in your own services. I am really fearful that the children that it's about our hearts and our heads, they will miss out. And we need to, all of us, push on, listen to researchers, take note of great practitioners and educators, and push on and advocate what's best for children, regardless.
Thank you, Ross. Let me just say a few words about that. COAG, the Council of Australian Governments, has been working collectively across all layers and colours of politics for a long time over this, and we've been behind that. We, the collective, that is, early childhood education and care as a collective, families, professionals, researchers, academics, teachers, you name the collection, people on the board of ACECQA, through all of the agencies, the support agencies. It's in our hands how we continue, and that we continue on this focus. Like you, Ros, we've seen many governments come and go, and in the period of the last decade, there have been many governments change at state level, at federal level, and effectively, the core development continues, and it will continue. It's for us to do this. It's a collective endeavour, and it takes a long time to make small steps at a societal level. In a direct individual in a centre, perhaps you can see more radical, larger changes inside of a room in a moment. You might take a team effort and take a particular strategy, or decide you're going to work on something specific, and you really hone that, and it develops and it builds, and you see a transformation, and you see it in the way the children are working with you, what children are doing, the way families are engaging, and that's terrific. It's motivation to keep going. At the whole of society level, it's always slower to get the long reach feed, which is why the research, it is quite remarkable to get significant research effects at societal levels or in particular studies over long times. But I think the National Quality Framework gives us a fantastic platform to keep working, to keep our focus and to hold our centre. That is, we really are focused on raising outcomes for Australia's children and ensuring that they have the best possible starts in their lives, and that we hand them on to our very close colleagues in the education system. We put out our hands and we make a very strong bridge to the education system, because transitions and continuity are very important. And effectively, as children go through their lives, you will know from working with children who are perhaps much older than, and it's a long time since you've seen them or whatever. I still encounter children I've worked with, surprisingly, but it's quite affirming to see what has been somebody's lifelong learning story and how they're going, and that there are others who are interested in them as well. So yeah, let's keep our energy going on that, and hopefully the National Quality Framework, the National Quality Standard, the review and rating process, which is about quality improvement. It's about giving more information and thinking collectively and being a team. If we hold to some of those standards, those focuses, it'll be very strong. And we have to educate all our politicians, whoever they might be, past, present and future, just as we have to keep working with our communities. Other comments, questions? Thank you for that. I'm not sure how we're going for time. We're out of time? Yeah. You know, I've lost the time as to which time we were finishing. Please let me thank you for your participation and thanks to our... Thanks very much.